Okay, so Carmine. Um,
Let
I've
me
been
set
reading
this
a
up
lot.
for the audience because I fucking love this. Preston hits me up and he's like, "All right, I figured it out. It's Tyrion's fault we're not getting Winds of Winter." And I'm like, "Really?" Here the entire time I was thinking it was George's asshole problem where he's no longer a starving artist and he can afford to do whatever the fuck he wants. Fuck his legacy. He's just going to be as slow as possible. But you're
Well,
saying it's Tyrion's fault.
that's all part of it, but Tyrion's definitely like I don't know if Tyrion's a symptom of it all, but like Tyrion is like the
Hmm.
forefront. I think everything wrong. Like if you want to look at like what going on in George's head, what the problem is, I think Tyrion at Dance with Dragons is that problem. Like so just a little background Nearly Done is the first Tyrion like fanfic chapter. Um and so I've been focusing a lot on Tyrion, been rereading the Tyrion A Dance with Dragons chapters. And thinking about Tyrion a lot and going over it with the editors and things like that. And then I realized like, oh my God, I've spent so much time on Tyrion, so much time on nothing. Because the thing about Tyrion's story, it goes nowhere, right? So it's a lot of like
Hmm.
spending and wasting time making something as clever and playful and poetic as possible because Tyrion chapters are the most poetic and the most clever chapters, like language wise. Um, that's a big thing that only through like you don't realize at the first read, but eventually you start noticing that like George, when he writes in different voices, he he for the different characters, he writes very differently. The prose is very different. So like how a Tyrion chapter is written is very different from how a Bran chapter is written. It's very different from how a Victorian chapter is written. It's very different from how an Areo Hotah chapter is written. Like what words are used, like how poetic the sentence is, the length of the sentence, all of these sorts of things. So Tyrion chapters are the longest sentences, the most poetic language, and then on top of it, Tyrion himself is just constantly, almost annoyingly so, saying something clever every time, every single time. You can't just have the story go. He can't just say something normal to advance something. No, it's got to be something clever, and it's got to be dirty, and it's got to be it's just it's so much. And so I've heard George in interviews talking about how Tyrion chapters give him a lot of heartburn because he knows that he can go back and like make it even more clever and find even more things for it. And so it's just like a Tyrion
Hmm.
chapter is never done because it can always be more clever, but it doesn't go anywhere. Like the chapter's never done and it doesn't advance the plot at all. And so I wanted to talk about like going back, and I've recently reread Tyrion A Dance with Dragons, and God, it's just such a problem. Like it's like I'm almost like angry at like because I don't even know. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I was like writing it and just really hyper focusing on it now and how Tyrion sounds. But it's just, man, what a solid waste of time. Like, it was just what a solid fucking waste of time Tyrion is. And I mean, does this sound really harsh?
No, but at the same time, I have to ask: does this give you a newfound appreciate? Not maybe appreciation is not the word. Does this give you some like sympathy for Dave and Dan in later seasons without any book material to cover
It
Tyrion
it
when they're
does.
adapting
It gives me
Tyrion?
sympathy for George too. Like when I reread Tyrion, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can tell how much time it took to craft what he's writing. I can tell, like, oh my gosh, like word for word, like it's beautiful prose. It's just like he must have taken forever to craft it. And yet it's also like nothing. It's- uh, I know it sounds really harsh, but it does. It does. give me some sympathy for Dan and Dave. I understand now why they threw it all away. Like the Tyrion story was thrown away in the show. Like it's just not there, right?
Tyrion is done dirty the same way a lot of the other characters are done dirty. After season 5, everyone's just kind of waiting for something to happen, for either one of the other big 7 main cast members to do something. Usually Jon or Dany moving the plot forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, it happened in Brienne, the Hound. Everyone's just kind of waiting for, the ball to drop.
But they just, Dan and Dave fast forward through everything. So let's go through Tyrion here for a second and just kind of recap what happens, and you'll kind of see what the problem is. So, but here we go. This is where I think when people start talking about the Tyrion story, the Shy Maid is when I think it starts hitting its groove. And so here he gets on the Shy Maid, medium-sized chapter, and we're introduced to Septa Lemore for a good period of time. And then we get into young Griff's education and Volantis' backstory. He said the education is on like history, so they start talking about Volantis. And then
when does Septa Lemore appear? Is this it?
Yeah, this is it. This is where she's introduced, really, or in detail.
Where this is the chapter everyone gets that she might be a Shara Dane because she looks like she's has given birth before.
Yeah,
with the stretch
she's given
marks.
birth. She's around the right age. She's like he describes her as a handsome woman, but still attractive. But something like in her late 30s or early 40s. Is the idea. But there's a lot of time wasting, but it's like a lot of atmosphere. Like stealing biscuits and stuff and eating food descriptions. So one of the things that I also think that destroys the Tyrion chapters is that normally, when you're in a new destination, you want to at least give some setting. But Tyrion's in a new destination like every chapter. So there's just all this time wasted on setting. And so it's just setting. And then this is your new setting. And this is your new setting. And this is your new setting. And let's waste a lot of pages describing what it looks like. And so, this is what happens. Like Tyrion 1, he's talking about the manse. And then they're talking about the hills of Andalos. And then, then we get on the river and he's talking about life on the river. And, you can visualize it. It's all very beautifully written, but the story's not getting anywhere. This isn't advancing the story. I'm just like getting pretty descriptions of hills and rivers, and it doesn't affect Tyrion. It's not like Tyrion becomes like, he sees nature and he sees how world diverse and cool the world is and he changes, because he doesn't, it's just like, it's just setting for the sake of setting. But nonetheless, I think people like this Tyrion part, and really, I think had they, had George taken Tyrion 1 through 3 and made it one chapter and then jumped into him being on the Shy Maid and focused on that, it would have been more interesting, especially with the characters that he's with. More time with Jon Con and Aegon and Haldon and Septa Lemore, So then we move on to probably, I would say, the best chapter of the story. Medium-sized chapter, maybe a little on the short side. Tyrion 5, and this is, of course, Tyrion in Croane fighting the Stone Men. And this is a pretty exciting and important chapter. Very interesting. He also reveals, you get the Aegon reveal. But this is some action. Some action actually happens. So I think people very much remember this chapter. Does this one stick out for you?
Yeah, this is the one where he gets dragged down by the stone men, and basically what you said. This is the one that sticks out for me.
Yeah. But it's funny, like what you describe of like what you remember from the previous chapters, and you're like, oh right, Haldon quizzes Tyrion once on some knowledge, and you're like, okay, like It's about all you remember from the first 4 chapters is like Septa Lemore being naked and Halden quizzing Tyrion on some knowledge.
Don't question it. It's been years. It's been years,
Yo,
and over
but this
time,
is
like yeah.
I think it's telling though, right? It's telling about like what is salient and what like sticks out. Um, so this is a big chapter, where you get the little warp, perhaps a time warp, who knows? But the 2 bridges, the stone men, him revealing Aegon, him falling into the water. This is probably the best chapter of the whole bunch. Just because it's also it's creepy on top of it. And then we get to Tyrion 6. Tyrion 6 is they arrive in Selhorys. And first he plays Syvass with Aegon. And he convinces Aegon to go west instead of east. And it's a pretty clever little scene. I think the tricking Aegon scene is very, very well done. Because he's telling him a strategy, and then the actual strategy on the board is the exact opposite. And it's what Aegon should be doing is the actual Syvass game they're playing, but he's telling him words wise to do the exact opposite of what he's doing on the board. It's very cleverly written. I like it a lot. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but I'm also surprised that you didn't mention the whole. You're not mentioning the time when Aegon, he's talking to Aegon about what's going on with Westeros, about how instead of going east, they should land in Dorne and take advantage of all the problems and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the Syvass game. So
Okay.
what George does, it's very clever. So Tyrion and Aegon are playing Syvass, and he tells Aegon that, you know what, if you go east to Daenerys, she's going to see you as a beggar. And what's smarter is if you go west, establish yourself, and then when she comes to you, you'll be on equal footing. And he tells him, like, also don't trust anybody. Everybody's a liar. And then meanwhile, in the game they're playing, he defeats Aegon, and his lesson is keep your dragon close. And of course, so the Syvass game is the good advice, and Tyrion is purposely telling him bad advice. In fact, later in the story, he's like, "Oh, Tyrion, the boy fell for it." So it's very cleverly written, where if you're paying attention to what they're playing, how they're playing Syvass, the real true lesson is there. Keep your dragons close. And Tyrion is lying to him and telling him the exact opposite and convinces him to go west. Um, it's a very well done chapter, and this is why I do think that like the Shy Maid part of Tyrion is the best part. Like the first 3 chapters were a waste of fucking time, and then the second 3 chapters is really Tyrion hitting his stride. You get really important characters, great characters that are introduced. You get the exciting Stone Men situation. Then you get this really clever, like tricking Aegon situation. Like really important events that all happen, um, that are quite well written. You know.
Is this the chapter that ends with him in the brothel and
Yes.
him being just a piece of shit in the brothel and then
Yes.
ultimately getting taken
Yes.
by Jorah? Okay.
Yeah. It's he then after the tricking of Aegon, he then goes and goes plays Syvass with Cavo, who is he's the customs official, and he gets more history about Volantis. Oh my god, there's so much fucking. By the way, there's so much fucking Volantis history in all of this in all of this that goes nowhere. Like it's not that important. Like Volantis' history is not that. Like this is all leading up to the fact that like Volantis is going to have an election, and after the election, they're going to support Dany, or they're going to want war against Dany. But then that war is going to get flipped because of the slave soldiers or something, and like
Mm.
you didn't need this incredibly complicated situation. You didn't need to like be telling us about all the different candidates and the tiger faction, the elephant faction, all of this, like it wasn't necessary, but for essentially they're going to go to war with Daenerys, which they should be doing because they're slavers, and then have their soldiers like be red god zealots. It doesn't take that much, but so much time is on Volantis history. Like you've got like one, like Illyrio talks about Volantis, and then the lesson with Aegon they talk about Volantis, and then there's this ship, this ship heads up called the Kingfisher, and they talk about Volantis, and then we get to Cavo and he talks about Volantis, and then we get to the fucking Volantis chapter, and oh my god, it's just so much on Volantis. For no,
these chapters are one of the reasons why the fandom loves to say how George is more interested in filling out his world rather than finishing the story, and I don't blame them, but
yeah,
at the same time, that's always been a thing. Like Brienne walking through the Riverlands and all this other crap and all these houses. We've always kind of had stuff like this.
A bit. So yeah, he does go to the brothel and he treats the sex worker there like shit, which he already did that. Like he already treated another sex worker like shit. Like one of them could have been cut. He doesn't need to do it twice. But nonetheless, he goes to the first sex worker at Illyrio's manse was not necessary because he's already doing that, being shitty to a sex worker like later. And then just the weird sheer coincidence, the contrivance that in the entire world, Jorah would be in the same brothel. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, I granted, like, he runs into Catelyn at the end of the crossroads, but it's the end of the crossroads. You're supposed to, like, everybody's supposed to meet there, and perhaps there was actually a scheme for them to meet. But like, why would Jorah be in the middle of Selhoris? Like, it's such a contrivance. Oh, this is where it starts getting bad. Like I say, I think the set, like part 2, as I say, it was like 4 parts to Tyrion. So like chapters 4 through 6 are like the highlight of Tyrion. And then chapters 7 through 9 are it's just where everything like fucking falls apart. So Tyrion 7 is my least favorite chapter in all of Ice and Fire. I hate it. I hate this chapter so much. It's so beautifully written. And it is such useless trash. Like, it's just like it goes. So this chapter is 9,401 words. Okay. This is the 3rd longest chapter in Ice and Fire. Okay. The first longest is Elaine to A Feast for Crows, where she's coming down the mountain with Sweet Robin, which is a brilliant chapter because Miranda Royce is wonderful in that. And the 2nd longest chapter is Crescent's prologue in A Clash of Kings. So both of those chapters being super long, I don't mind it because those are both incredible chapters. There is no reason this chapter needs to be 9,400 fucking words. There's none. So this is the worst. Okay. 9,402 words. The first 3,500 words is a description of them walking through Volantis. They walk through Volantis for the length of like an entire, like what should be the length of an entire chapter. And then another 2,000 words after that is like Tyrion spending the night in Jorah's room. Like, it's just the descriptions of like the water, them going across the bridge, like slaves, how things work, like the merchant's house, him being in a room, the length of his chain, if there's a window and he can jump out of it, like Jorah's hair. Like, it just goes on and on and on and on. It is the worst. It is the worst. I mean, it's beautifully written. It is the worst fucking chapter. And then after that, we get to the Widow on the Waterfront, which is a long, long conversation. What on the Waterfront ordeal is very, very long. It's like a third of the chapter, but like, um, we get her backstory. Who fucking cares? Like, it's like we get this long fucking backstory on this character whose main function is to give them a ship. Like, that's it. Like, um, and then it doesn't even like, and the whole, like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, their whole ordeal with her. Like, they get attacked by Penny, and then for some reason, after nearly murdering a dude, they like, Penny is like given food and cleaned up, and then Tyrion lets her on the ship with them, even though she tried to murder him. Like, and like, the widow on the waterfront like doesn't trust Jorah, but then after Penny attacks Tyrion, she suddenly trusts Jorah. It doesn't make it's the weirdest fucking 180. You know, that makes me think that, like, is George thinking that there's some sort of conspiracy? Like, like what? Why did she do this? It's just, but even if there were a conspiracy for like why the Widow of the Waterfront really let them do that, why would the characters fall for it? Wouldn't they be like, this is fishy? Why did she suddenly change her mind? That was weird. You know, like, none of it makes sense. Like, it's just the most illogical shift where all of a sudden the Widow of the Waterfront wants to send them, and um, Penny, like, Tyrion wants to bring Penny along for no fucking reason. It's really fucking weird. It's a really fucking weird chapter. It's the worst. It's the worst. Worst chapter in A Dance with Dragons. A worst chapter in Ice and Fire. I can't think of a worse chapter.